I'm Cameron. I'm 29 years old. And my own mother told me that the greatest gift I could give my brother for his wedding was to vanish from the family forever. Before I tell you how a multimillion-dollar CEO showed up in the middle of that catastrophic wedding and changed my life with a single sentence, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It's good to know you're out there. The sound of chaos is a strange thing. From the quiet of my car in the far corner of the parking lot, it was a muffled symphony of disaster. I could imagine the discordant notes, the confused chatter of 100 guests, the shrill, panicked questions, and above it all, the booming, furious voice of my brother Brian. It was the sound of a perfectly orchestrated world coming completely, beautifully undone. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of the eerie Grand Manor, the venue I had so carefully selected months ago. It was warm on my skin, a stark contrast to the core of ice that had formed in my chest. Inside that magnificent building, a wedding was supposed to be happening. His wedding, the wedding I had planned, the wedding I had paid for, the wedding I had just single-handedly obliterated. I leaned my head back against the worn fabric of the driver's seat and closed my eyes, picturing the scene. The grand ballroom, which should have been filled with the scent of imported orchids and roast chicken, would be stark and empty. The tables, which I had mapped out with military precision, would be bare. No white linens, no gleaming silverware, no custom floral centerpieces. The string quartet I had booked would be at home, their instruments silent. The caterers would be packing up unused ingredients. My phone, lying on the passenger seat, was having a seizure. It buzzed and vibrated relentlessly against the leather. The screen lit up in a frantic, predictable cycle. Dad, Brian, Mom, Aunt Carol, Brian. It was a desperate digital scream for the person they had banished just last night. The fixer, the problem solver, the family janitor. But that person was no longer available. I could see them so clearly in my mind's eye. My mother, Eleanor, her face a mask of horrified disbelief, her social standing crumbling with every passing second. My father, Richard, pale and useless, wringing his hands as he always did in a crisis. And Brian, my golden boy brother, his handsome face usually so smug and self-assured, would be contorted into a mask of pure, impotent rage. And Lauren, the bride, a part of me, a small lingering part, felt a pang of sympathy for her. She was collateral damage in a war she hadn't even known was being fought. They wanted me to vanish. A simple request delivered with the casual cruelty of a death sentence. So I did. I vanished. And I took their perfect day with me, pulling it down into the abyss right alongside me. My hand turned the key in the ignition. The old engine coughed, then settled into a familiar, comforting rumble. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. There was nothing left for me back there. As I pulled out of the parking lot and onto the open road, the frantic buzzing of my phone faded into the background noise of the tires on asphalt. For the first time in 29 years, I wasn't driving toward a problem I had to solve. I was driving away from one. I was driving toward an unknown future, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of my past. It wasn't supposed to end like this. But then again, they were the ones who lit the match. It started so much earlier than just one night. It was a long, slow burn of slights and sacrifices that all led to this final, glorious explosion. To understand how a man could dismantle his own brother's wedding, you have to understand what it was like to grow up as me in the Ellis house. There were two sons, Brian, the golden child, and Cameron, the other one. Brian was born with a spotlight attached to him. He was the charming one, the witty one, the one who looked good in the family Christmas photo. I was the one who made sure the camera had batteries. From as early as I can remember, our roles were defined. I remember the specific moment the ice in my chest started to form, though I didn't recognize it at the time. It was last night. The dinner. The clinking of expensive silverware on china. The air in the room had been heavy, thick with the scent of my mother's pot roast and the heavier stench of entitlement. I had been running on fumes for weeks. My eyes were gritty from lack of sleep. My bank account was drained to a dangerous low, and my patience was a frayed wire snapping in the wind. I had sat there, listening to Brian list off his new demands for the wedding that was less than 24 hours away. "Lobster," he had said, waving his fork like a baton. "And that photographer, the one who shoots for the NFL. I want him." When I told him no, when I told him the money was gone, that my money was gone, he didn't just get angry. He got nasty. He looked at me with that familiar sneer, the one he'd perfected over 3 decades. "You're just jealous," he spat. "You've always been jealous of me, Cameron. You're trying to ruin my day because you're a loser." I looked to my father for support. He just stared at his plate, avoiding my eyes, the ultimate act of cowardice. Then I looked at my mother, Eleanor Ellis, the woman who had given birth to me. I waited for her to correct him, to say, "No, Brian, your brother has worked hard. He's paid for everything." Instead, she took a sip of her wine, set the glass down with a delicate click, and looked right through me. "Honestly, Cameron," she said, her voice smooth and cold, "at this point, the greatest gift you could give your brother for his wedding is you vanishing from this family. Forever." The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was deafening. It was the sound of a structural support beam snapping inside a building just before the collapse. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I didn't beg for them to understand. Something inside me, the part that had spent a lifetime absorbing blows, swallowing insults, and hoping for a scrap of praise, didn't just break. It turned to dust and blew away. And in its place was a vast, silent, and terrifying emptiness. I slowly, deliberately pushed my chair back from the table. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh sound that made Aunt Carol flinch. I stood up. I looked at each of their faces. Brian's triumphant smirk, my father's averted gaze, my mother's icy dismissal. I didn't say a single word. I turned my back on them, walked out of the dining room, down the hall, and out the front door into the cool night air. The click of the door closing behind me was the last sound I ever wanted to hear from that house. It was the sound of a final, irrevocable full stop. The inside of my car was a sanctuary of silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't know where I was going. I just drove. The familiar streets of my hometown unspooled before me like a movie I had seen too many times. Every corner held a memory, and tonight, every memory was tainted. There was the park where I scraped my knee and waited for my dad to pick me up. He was 2 hours late because Brian had a scrimmage. There was the movie theater where I'd taken my first date, using money I earned mowing lawns because my parents forgot my allowance again. There was the grocery store, Ellis Groceries, a monument to my greatest sacrifice and my biggest mistake. Vanishing forever. The words weren't echoing anymore. They had settled heavy and cold in the pit of my stomach. My mother's voice, her calm, measured delivery. It was a clinical assessment. A problem identified and a solution proposed. I was the problem. Vanishing was the solution. For the first hour I was numb. A hollowed-out shell just going through the motions of driving. My hands were steady on the wheel, my eyes on the road, but my mind was blank white static. Then the numbness began to recede, and the pain flooded in. It was a deep, tearing agony. The pain of a limb being amputated without anesthesia. I thought of every sacrifice, big and small. The patched bicycle tire. The nights spent studying the store's finances. The 36-hour marathon during the blizzard. The Vance Corporation contract, the dream I had killed with my own hands. I had done it all for them. For their approval. For their love. And it had all amounted to less than nothing. I had to pull over. The tears came so violently I couldn't see the road. I parked on the gravel shoulder of a dark, deserted country road, the engine ticking in the sudden silence, and I let myself shatter. I pounded my fists on the steering wheel, a raw, guttural sound of pure anguish tearing from my throat. It was the sound of a lifetime of being invisible, of being second best, of being the useful, disposable son. I wept for the boy who just wanted his parents to be proud of him, and for the man who had finally realized they never would be. The storm passed. The tears subsided, leaving behind a landscape of ruin and a strange, cold clarity. The pain was still there, but it had been burned clean by the rage. They didn't see me as a son. They saw me as a tool that had just been told it was no longer needed. And that's when the new thought began to form. It started as a whisper, a flicker of rebellion in the darkness. They wanted me to vanish. Okay, I would vanish, but I wouldn't go quietly. I wouldn't just fade into the background like I always had. If a tool is removed from a machine, the machine stops working. I was the tool that had built their perfect wedding. What would happen if I just took myself away? A slow, humorless smile touched my lips, felt alien on my face. They wanted a gift, the gift of my absence. Fine. I would give them exactly what they asked for. I would give them an absence so profound, so complete, it would swallow their perfect day whole. My hand, now perfectly steady, reached for the phone. I ignored the litany of texts and missed calls that had already begun. I scrolled to the bottom of my contacts list and hit the name Noah. He picked up on the first ring, his voice laced with concern. Cam? It's after midnight. Everything okay for tomorrow? I took a deep breath, the cold night air filling my lungs, feeling like the first clean breath I'd taken in years. You know how you've been telling me for 10 years that I'm a doormat? I said, my voice eerily calm. Yeah. Well, I said, the grim smile audible in my voice. The doormat is about to get up and walk away, and it's going to take the whole damn front porch with it. To understand the magnitude of what I was about to do, you have to understand the history. You have to understand the currency of the Ellis family. It wasn't love. It wasn't loyalty. It was utility. There were two sons. Brian, the asset, and Cameron, the utility. Brian was the golden child. He was born with a natural charm that seemed to short-circuit my parents' critical thinking skills. He was the one who looked good in a suit, the one who could schmooze a room, the one who was destined for great things. I was Cameron. I was the one who fixed the leaky faucet. I was the one who figured out why the Wi-Fi wasn't working. I was the one who made sure the taxes were filed on time. I remember when we were kids, maybe 10 or 11. Brian had just gotten a brand new bicycle for his birthday. A gleaming red mountain bike with all the gears. I had my cousin's hand-me-down, rusted at the chain, but I didn't mind. 2 days later, Brian got a flat tire. He threw the bike down in the driveway, kicking the dirt, screaming about how stupid the bike was. My father came out, not to scold him for throwing an expensive gift, but to comfort him. Then he turned to me. Cam, grab the tools. Fix your brother's bike. I spent that Saturday afternoon with my dad's rusty tools, patching the tube, greasing the chain, adjusting the brakes until my knuckles were raw and stained with grease. Brian spent the afternoon inside, watching cartoons and eating ice cream. When I finished, I wheeled the bike out. Brian ran out, grabbed the handlebars, and rode off without a single word to me. My father clapped me on the shoulder. A heavy, dismissive pat. Good job, son. You're the practical one. It was meant as a compliment, but it felt like a label. Practical. It meant I was useful. It meant I was necessary, but not celebrated. Brian was the star. I was the stagehand. This dynamic didn't change as we got older. It calcified. It hardened into a concrete reality that trapped me. While Brian was barely scraping by in law school, funded entirely by my parents' second mortgage, I was discovering I had a knack for business. Not just fixing bikes, but fixing systems. I had a mind for it. I could look at a failing business and see the cracks in the foundation. I could see where the money was leaking, where the marketing was failing, where the potential was hiding. By the time I was 25, I had built a small but respectable freelance career. I was helping struggling small businesses in the tri-state area find their footing. I was good at it. I was making a name for myself. And then came the opportunity that was supposed to be my escape velocity. Vance Corporation. Arthur Vance, a titan in the grocery and retail industry, was launching a regional initiative. He needed a marketing strategist who understood the local landscape. It was a dream job. The contract was for $40,000, which, to me at 25, might as well have been $1 million. It was more than a paycheck. It was validation. It was proof that I was more than just the family fixer. I poured my heart into the proposal. I spent weeks researching, crafting a campaign that was authentic and powerful. And it paid off. I beat out dozens of other applicants. I went through 3 rounds of interviews. The final step was a meeting with the CEO himself, Arthur Vance. He was an intimidating man, sharp as a tack, a man who saw right through corporate fluff. We connected. He saw my passion. At the end of the meeting, he shook my hand and said, "We'll be in touch soon, Mr. Ellis. Very soon." I walked out of that skyscraper feeling 10 feet tall. I was on the brink of everything I had ever wanted. The email arrived 2 days later. It was a formal offer. Senior strategist. A path to management. A signing bonus. My hands were shaking as I typed my reply. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was my mother. I answered, expecting to share my good news. I never got the chance. Her voice was a thin thread of panic. "Cameron, you have to come home." My stomach dropped. It was the voice she used when the plumbing burst or the taxes were overdue. It was her "we need the fixer" voice. "What is it, Mom? Is Dad okay?" "He's fine, but the store. It's a mess. The suppliers are threatening to cut us off. We took out a second mortgage to cover payroll last month. We're going to lose it, Cameron. Your father's legacy. Everything. It's all going to be gone." The words hit me like a physical blow. Ellis Groceries. My father's pride and joy. I knew they were struggling, but I had no idea it was this bad. "What about Brian?" I asked, a familiar, futile question. "He's a lawyer. Can't he look at the contracts? Negotiate with the suppliers?" "Oh, you know Brian," she said, her voice dismissive. "He's building his career. He can't get bogged down in this. This is more your area of expertise. You always knew how to make things work." There it was again. My function. My purpose. I looked at the email from Vance Corporation on my computer screen. The promise of my future shimmering right in front of me. Then I looked at the phone in my hand. The call from a past that refused to let me go. I should have said no. I should have told her to hire a consultant. But the guilt was a hook embedded deep in my gut. My father's face swam in my mind. The proud man reduced to losing everything he'd ever worked for. I declined the offer from Vance Corporation. I told them I had a family emergency. I didn't give details. I just clicked send and watched my future evaporate into the digital ether. 2 days later, I was back in Erie, standing not in a boardroom, but in the bleak, dusty backroom of a failing grocery store. The next 2 years were a brutal, relentless grind. I treated the rescue of Ellis Groceries like a military campaign. I slept in my old childhood bedroom. My days were a blur of spreadsheets, phone calls, and sheer, stubborn effort. I remember one brutal winter. A blizzard hit, burying the town in 3 feet of snow. The power went out. The store's ancient generator, the one my dad had been meaning to replace for years, failed to kick on. We had tens of thousands of dollars worth of frozen and refrigerated goods that were about to become a catastrophic loss. My father was in a state of pure panic. My mother was lighting candles and praying. Brian, home for the holidays, was complaining that the Wi-Fi was down and he couldn't text his girlfriend. I didn't complain. I bundled up, waded through the snow to the store, and spent the next 36 hours living on coffee and adrenaline. I manually hauled bags of ice from the one supplier in town who still had power. I rearranged the entire dairy section, packing the most perishable items in insulated containers. I called a friend whose dad was an electrician, and together, in the freezing dark, we managed to bypass the generator's faulty starter and get it roaring to life. My fingers were blue. My back felt like it was broken. But I saved the inventory, every last bit of it. When the power was restored and the roads were cleared, my family came to the store. Brian walked in, looked around and said, "Wow, didn't lose anything. Lucky break." Lucky break. By the end of the second year, the store wasn't just surviving. It was thriving. I had rebranded, cut costs, negotiated better deals, and launched a shop local campaign that brought customers flooding back. We were more profitable than we had been in Brian's entire lifetime. I had done it. I had pulled them back from the brink. I felt a deep, bone-weary satisfaction. I had sacrificed my dream, but I had saved my family. Surely now they would see me. The night of my supposed triumph was a family dinner. My mother cooked my favorite meal. My father opened a bottle of expensive wine. Even Brian was there. This is it, I thought. This is the moment they say thank you. My father stood, his glass raised, his face flushed with pride. As you all know, he began, the last couple of years have been a roller coaster, but we've come through it stronger than ever. The store is thriving, and it's time to secure its future. He smiled a wide, proud grin. That's why Eleanor and I have decided to officially hand over the management of Ellis Groceries to Brian. The wine glass in my hand felt suddenly heavy. The air rushed from my lungs. I must have misheard. I looked around the table. My mother was beaming. My Aunt Carol was clapping. And Brian was looking magnanimous, like a king accepting his rightful crown. What? The word was a croak. It's the logical choice, Cameron, my mother said gently, as if explaining something to a slow child. Brian has the education, the legal background. He sees the big picture. Running a business is about more than just stocking shelves. Stocking shelves. That's what she reduced my 2 years of strategic turnaround to. Stocking shelves. But, I stammered. I built this. I saved it. Brian leaned forward, a condescending smile playing on his lips. He patted my hand. You did a good job, Cam. Really. You held down the fort. But it's time for a real professional to take over. Don't worry, you can keep handling the day-to-day operations. You're great at that. I looked at my father, pleading with my eyes. He just shrugged, a slight, uncomfortable twitch of his shoulders. It's for the best, son. Brian will elevate the family name. They hadn't just given him the credit. They had, in their minds, completely invalidated my contribution. I wasn't the architect of the success. I was just the hired help who had kept the lights on until the real boss arrived. That night, something changed. The familiar ache of being overlooked curdled into something colder. But like a fool, I stayed. I stayed because I didn't know how to leave. I stayed because I was addicted to the hope that one day, if I just worked hard enough, they would love me. I didn't know it then, but that betrayal was just the rehearsal. The main event was yet to come. And it would come in the form of a wedding. The announcement sent a ripple of excitement through the family that bordered on hysteria. Brian was engaged, and not just to anyone. His fiancée was Lauren Vance. Lauren Vance, as in the daughter of Arthur Vance. The same Arthur Vance whose job offer I had turned down to save my family's store. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. It felt like the universe was playing a cruel joke specifically on me. Brian, the man who had never worked a hard day in his life, was marrying into the family of the man who represented the career I had sacrificed. Lauren was a genuinely sweet girl. Her only flaw, as far as I could see, was her complete inability to see Brian for the egotistical parasite he was. She was quiet, elegant, and seemed to worship the ground he walked on. She saw the golden boy my parents had invented, not the lazy narcissist I knew. Of course, the wedding had to be the social event of the season in Erie. It was a chance for my parents to show off their successful son, the manager of Ellis Groceries, and his beautiful, well-connected bride. And in a move of stunning, almost comical predictability, they turned to me to make it happen. Cameron, darling, my mother said, cornering me in the dairy aisle one Tuesday, you simply must plan the wedding. You're the only one with the head for details and budgets. Brian is far too busy with the strictly legal aspects of the business, and Lauren's family is handling the rehearsal dinner. It would be such a tremendous help. Translation: Brian is too lazy, and we don't want to pay a professional wedding planner. A sane person would have laughed in her face. A sane person would have told her to hire a professional. But a small, stupid, stubbornly hopeful part of me saw this as a final chance. Maybe this time it would be different. This wasn't about the store. This was a personal family event. If I could execute this flawlessly, if I could give Brian and his bride the perfect day, Then they would have to acknowledge me. They would have to thank me. They would finally see me. So I said, yes, I'd be honored, Mom. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. I approached the task like a business project. I created spreadsheets. I made timelines. I researched vendors with the tenacity of a detective. I sat down with Brian and Lauren to understand their vision, which mostly consisted of Brian pointing at pictures in glossy magazines and saying, I want that. The budget was the first hurdle. My parents magnanimously offered $15,000. It was a generous amount for a normal wedding, but not nearly enough for the kind of statement wedding Brian had in his head. The initial quotes were coming in closer to $30,000. When I presented this reality to them, my father balked and Brian scoffed. Well, figure it out, Cam, Brian said, waving his hand as if I could magically pull money from thin air. You're the math guy. And so, in a moment of utter self-destructive insanity, I made the fatal error. I'll cover the difference, I heard myself say. I have some savings. I'll put in $10,000. Consider it my wedding gift. The relief on their faces was immediate and absolute. Brian clapped me on the back. See? I knew you'd handle it, little brother. You always do. That $10,000 was everything I had. It was my escape Erie fund. It was the nest egg I had been slowly rebuilding since the Vance Corporation fiasco, scrimping and saving from the meager salary they paid me, hoping to eventually move away and start over. I was lighting my freedom on fire to throw a party for the brother who had stolen my career. With the budget settled, thanks to my life savings, I went to work. And I was damn good at it. I found a breathtaking historic manor that had a last-minute cancellation, the Erie Grand Manor. I negotiated a brilliant package deal with a caterer named Sal who made the best roast chicken in the county. I found a photographer with an artist's eye and a band that could get even my father on the dance floor. Every contract was scrutinized. Every deposit paid promptly from my bank account. I had it all locked down. A champagne wedding on a beer budget. I presented the final detailed plan to the family about 2 months out. It was perfect, elegant, impressive, and not a single dollar over our agreed-upon total. For a brief, shining moment, everyone was happy. Lauren was thrilled. My parents were proud. Even Brian seemed genuinely impressed. Wow, Cam, he said. This is actually perfect. That single word of praise was like a drug. It fed the desperate, starving part of my soul. I let myself believe that this time, things would be different. This time, my sacrifice would be worth it. The fragile peace lasted for exactly 4 days. The first tremor that signaled the coming earthquake was, predictably, my Aunt Carol. She was my father's sister, a woman whose entire personality was built on a foundation of snobbery and one-upmanship. She came for Sunday dinner, listened to my detailed wedding plans with a pursed smile, and then proceeded to dismantle them piece by piece. A local band? She said, her voice dripping with condescension as she sipped her wine. Oh, Eleanor, no. That's a bit quaint. For a wedding of this caliber, for a man of Brian's professional standing, you need something more sophisticated. I was just at a fundraiser in Pittsburgh and they had a string quartet. It was absolutely divine. So much more class. I saw the flicker in Brian's eyes. A seed had been planted. A string quartet does sound pretty amazing, he mused, looking at me. Brian, the band is already booked and the deposit is paid, I said, keeping my voice even. A string quartet of the kind she's talking about would cost at least $5,000. It's not in the budget. Oh, Cameron, don't be such a stick in the mud. My mother chided instantly. This is his wedding day. A little extra for some elegance is worth it. Just make it work. Just make it work. That phrase became the soundtrack to my personal hell for the next 2 months. It was the answer to every ludicrous, budget-busting demand that followed. After the string quartet came the flowers. The beautiful, locally sourced arrangements I had planned were suddenly deemed common. Brian, after a conversation with Aunt Carol about a society wedding she'd read about, decided he absolutely had to have white orchids. Flown in from Hawaii. It's about the aesthetic, Cam, he explained, as if I were a simpleton. It's a look. It's prestige. It's also $3,000 for flowers that will be dead in a day. I countered, my voice tight. We don't have the money. Don't ruin your brother's vision with your cheapness. My father grumbled from behind his newspaper. Just make it work. The demands snowballed into an avalanche of entitlement. Lauren, bless her heart, would occasionally protest, saying, "Oh, Brian, that sounds like a lot." But she would immediately fold the second he applied any pressure. He wanted a custom ice sculpture of their initials. He wanted a celebrity DJ from Cleveland to take over after the quaint string quartet. And then the Rolls-Royce. "We need a Rolls-Royce for the arrival," Brian announced one afternoon. "A vintage Phantom. Silver." "Brian," I said, rubbing my temples, "a vintage Rolls-Royce rental is insane. We have the limo booked." "Limos are for prom, Cameron. Rolls-Royces are for weddings. Do I have to explain everything to you?" Each new demand was a battle. I would present the cost, the logistical nightmare, the simple fact that the money was not there, and each time I would be met with the same wall of indignation. "Why are you making this so difficult?" my mother would ask, her face a mask of disappointment. "It's like you want my wedding to be second-rate," Brian would accuse, his voice filled with venom. "Are you that jealous of my happiness?" The accusation of jealousy was the knife they twisted most often. It was their go-to explanation for my fiscal responsibility. They couldn't conceive of the idea that I was simply trying to adhere to the budget we had all agreed on. In their minds, my practicality was a personal attack. I was exhausted. I was working 60-hour weeks at the store to make Brian look good as the manager, and spending every spare moment fighting with him about his wedding. The $10,000 from my savings was long gone, spent on deposits for things we didn't need. Now they were expecting me to fund this ever-expanding fantasy out of my own pocket, a pocket they knew was not deep. The dream of a thank you had long since died. Now my only goal was survival. Just get to the wedding day, let it happen, and then finally be free. I told myself I could handle it. I told myself it was almost over. Then came the night before the wedding. The night before the wedding was meant to be a final, calming family dinner at my parents' house. The calm lasted until the dessert plates were cleared. I was running on 4 hours of sleep and a gallon of caffeine. I had spent the entire day on the phone, soothing the ruffled feathers of the florist who was furious about the last-minute orchid demand, and the venue manager, Deborah, who was asking pointed questions about the growing list of unauthorized vendors Brian kept trying to add. All I wanted was to eat, go home to my apartment, and fall into a coma until my alarm went off the next morning. Brian, however, was practically vibrating with a manic, last-minute energy. He tapped his fork against his water glass to get everyone's attention, a smug, self-satisfied smile on his face. "Okay, team," he began, as if we were in a corporate huddle. "I've had a stroke of genius. A final touch to elevate the entire experience tomorrow." I felt a familiar cold dread snake up my spine. "First," he announced, "I think we need a lobster tail station for the late-night snack. Chicken is just so basic. Second, I was tasting the champagne we ordered, and it's fine, but it's not great. Dad, we should get a few cases of that vintage stuff you love. And finally, and this is the big one, a friend of a friend knows a guy who does wedding photography for pro athletes. He's available tomorrow. We have to have him. Imagine the pictures." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process the sheer, breathtaking audacity. It wasn't just one demand. It was a triple-decker sandwich of financial insanity. Lobster, vintage champagne, a celebrity photographer. We were less than 24 hours out. I placed my fork down very carefully. "Brian," I said, my voice dangerously low. "No." He blinked, genuinely surprised by my flat refusal. "What do you mean?" "No, I'm not asking. I'm telling. It's too late." "It's my wedding," he shot back. "The caterer's final numbers were due last week," I explained, ticking the points off on my fingers, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "The alcohol has been purchased and delivered, and we have an excellent, very expensive photographer already under contract. There is no more money. The budget, the one I paid for, is gone. It is over. We cannot add a single thing. Brian's face, which had been beaming with excitement, contorted into an ugly, familiar sneer. The one you paid for? Oh please, don't act like you're some great martyr. It's a few grand. That's a rounding error on my future salary. Then you write the check, I said. Right now. Write a check for $10,000 to cover the rush fees and the lobster. Do it, he scoffed. My money is tied up in investments right now. You know that. You mean you don't have it, I said. Because you've never saved a dime in your life. You're being pathetic and cheap, just like always, Brian shouted, slamming his hand on the table. You're trying to ruin this for me. You've been trying to sabotage this wedding from the beginning because you can't stand to see me happy. The accusation, so ludicrous and so cruel, hung in the air. I looked around the table for support, for just one person to say, "That's enough, Brian. Cameron has done enough." My father suddenly found the pattern on his dinner plate intensely fascinating. Aunt Carol nodded in agreement with Brian, muttering something about brotherly duty, and my mother looked at me. Her face was not angry. It was not sad. It was cold. Utterly, glacially cold. She set her wine glass down with a soft click. "Samuel," she said, using my full name, which she only did when she was disappointed. "Your brother has a point. You have been needlessly difficult through this whole process. Honestly, at this point, the greatest gift you could give your brother for his wedding is you vanishing from this family. Forever." The world stopped. The cheerful ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to grow louder, marking the seconds of my own execution. Vanishing forever. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an insult hurled in the heat of the moment. It was a statement of fact. It was her telling me exactly what I was worth to them. 0. It was a severance package for 29 years of service. I looked at her. I really looked at her. And for the first time, I didn't see my mother. I saw a stranger. A cruel, shallow stranger who had used me up and was now throwing away the husk. That was the moment the fixer died. That was the moment Cameron the son died. And someone else was born. I stood up. I walked out. And as the door clicked shut behind me, I knew exactly what I had to do. I found a cheap, anonymous motel off the highway, the kind with flickering neon signs and questionable bedspreads. It was perfect. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress, drinking bitter black coffee from a styrofoam cup, and I planned. There was no rage in my actions now. The tears on the side of the road had washed all that away. Now there was just a cold, methodical precision. I opened my laptop, pulled up the folder labeled Brian's wedding, and arranged all the contracts and invoices in the order I would need them. I was dismantling a bomb I had built myself, and I knew exactly which wires to cut and in what sequence. At 7:59 a.m., I took a final sip of coffee. Showtime. My first call was to Deborah, the events manager at the Erie Grand Manor. She was a cheerful, efficient woman I developed a good rapport with over the past few months. She answered with a chipper, "Erie Grand Manor. Deborah speaking." "Deborah, good morning. It's Cameron Ellis." "Cam, the man of the hour." "Well, the brother of the man of the hour," she laughed. "Are you all ready for the big day?" "Actually, Deborah, there's been a significant change of plan," I said, my voice calm and level. "I'm calling to inform you that the Ellis Vance wedding scheduled for today has been canceled." The silence on the other end of the line was so complete I thought the call might have dropped. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice a squeak. "Canceled? Cam, it's 8 o'clock in the morning. The wedding is in 6 hours. Our staff is already on their way in. The tables are set." "I understand the inconvenience," I said, my tone unapologetic. "It is an unforeseen family emergency. As per our contract, Section 7B, cancellations within 24 hours result in the forfeiture of the full deposit." Yes, that's correct," she stammered. "But the bride? The groom? Shouldn't I speak with your parents?" "No," I said, my voice firm, cutting off any room for argument. You will not. The contract is in my name, Cameron Ellis. The deposit was paid from my bank account. The liability is mine. The decision is mine. The event is cancelled. Do not open the doors. Do not set up the bar. Send the staff home. But please consider this my formal and final notification. I will be sending a confirmation email within the minute. Thank you for your services up to this point. I hung up before she could formulate another question. My heart was pounding, but not with fear. It was a thrill, a surge of pure, unadulterated control. For the first time in my life, I was holding the pen. The next call was to Sal, the caterer. He was a gruff but fair man. I gave him the same speech. He whistled low. Wow, kid. That's cold. But hey, you paid the deposit. It's your call. More roast chicken for my staff, I guess. Keep the deposit, Sal. Sorry for the trouble. Trouble? You saved me a Saturday night. Good luck, kid. The florist was more dramatic. But the orchids, the Hawaiian orchids, have just arrived. They are fragile. I'm very sorry to hear that, I said, and to my surprise I actually was. It wasn't her fault. The deposit is yours to keep, of course. Donate the flowers to a hospital or a nursing home. Just don't deliver them to the manor. One by one I went down the list. The band, the photographer, the bakery for the 5-tier cake. Then came the call regarding the Rolls-Royce. The one Brian had demanded, the one I hadn't booked yet because I refused to pay for it. But I called the luxury rental agency anyway, just to be thorough, just in case Brian had tried to use my name to secure it. Yes, Mr. Ellis, the agent said. We have a hold for a phantom for a Brian Ellis, pending a credit card on file. Cancel it, I said, and flag the account. No authorization. Understood. Each conversation was a nail in the coffin of my brother's perfect day. With each call, I felt lighter. I was severing ties not just to a wedding, but to a lifetime of servitude. I was reclaiming my time, my money, and my sanity. By 9:45 a.m., it was done. An entire wedding, meticulously constructed over 6 months, had been vaporized in under 2 hours. I logged into my online banking. The non-refundable deposits were a painful loss, nearly $5,000 gone. But the larger payments, the final balances for the venue, the catering, the remaining vendor fees that I had been scheduled to transfer that morning were safe. $7,000 of my hard-earned money was no longer destined to be turned into ice sculptures and dead flowers. It was mine. I took the burner phone I had bought the night before from a 24-hour gas station. I turned it on. I typed one single text message to my own number, the one on the smartphone I had left charging in my locked car back in Erie. They wanted me to vanish. Wish granted. Then I snapped the cheap phone in half and tossed it in the motel trash can. I packed my bag, checked out, and got back in my car. This time I knew where I was going. South. Anywhere but here. I was gone. But the explosion I had set was just about to go off. The first sign that the carefully constructed universe of the Ellis family was about to implode came at precisely 11:02 a.m. My mother, Eleanor, swept into the grand ballroom of the Erie Grand Manor, ready to assume her role as the gracious mother of the groom. She was expecting to see a flurry of activity. Florists arranging centerpieces, caterers setting up serving stations, the band doing a sound check. She was met with silence and emptiness. The vast room was a hollow cavern. The tables were stacked against one wall, the chairs against the other. The floor was bare. There wasn't a flower, a tablecloth, or a single human being in sight. Her first reaction was confusion, then irritation. She marched through the hall to the manager's office, her heels clicking in angry rhythm on the polished floor. She found Deborah sitting at her desk, looking pale. "Deborah, what on earth is going on?" my mother demanded. "Where is everyone? The wedding is in 4 hours. This is completely unacceptable." Deborah looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of pity and fear. "Mrs. Ellis, I don't know how to tell you this. I received a call this morning from your son." "From Brian? What does he want now?" "No, ma'am. From Cameron. Cameron? My mother repeated, confused. What does he have to do with this? He cancelled, Mrs. Ellis, Deborah said, the words tumbling out. He cancelled the entire event. He was very specific. He cited the contract. He said it was a family emergency. My mother stared at her, her mind refusing to process the information. Cancelled? That's impossible. It's a joke. It must be some kind of horrible, childish prank. He wouldn't dare. She fumbled for her phone, her hands shaking. I'll call him right now and sort this out. But the call went straight to voicemail. So did the next one. And the one after that. By the time my father and Brian arrived at noon, my mother was in a full-blown panic. Brian walked in, beaming, ready to inspect his kingdom, and was met with the sight of his mother pacing frantically in an empty room. What's going on? He asked, his smile faltering. Why isn't anything set up? It's Cameron, my father said, his face grim. He'd been on his own phone trying to reach the caterer. He did this. He called every single vendor and cancelled. Said he was calm as a cucumber. Told them to keep the deposit and that the wedding was off. He what? The roar that erupted from Brian's chest was primal. It was the sound of a golden god discovering he was mortal after all. That little bastard. That insignificant little worm. How dare he? I'll ruin him. I'll sue him. You can't sue him, my father said numbly. The contracts, they were all in his name. We made him sign everything so we wouldn't have the liability. The realization hit Brian like a slap. Their own exploitation of me was now my shield. The first guests began to arrive shortly after 2 p.m., walking into a scene of utter chaos. Instead of champagne and classical music, they were met with the sight of the groom, red-faced and screaming into his phone, the mother of the groom weeping in a corner, and the father of the groom looking utterly helpless. And then they saw the bride. Lauren was standing by a window, a statue of frozen horror, her perfect makeup ruined by silent tears. Her dream day had turned into a public spectacle of humiliation. The whispers started immediately. What happened? Did he get left at the altar? I heard the brother had a breakdown. Brian, in his rage, made everything worse. He tried to bully the venue staff into action. I don't care what my brother said. I'm the groom. Get some tables out here. Order pizzas. Do something. Deborah, her patience finally exhausted, stood up. Sir, your family's contract was with Cameron Ellis. He cancelled it. As of 8:05 this morning, you have no event booked here. Frankly, you and your guests are trespassing. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Trespassing. The final brutal humiliation. Into this vortex of chaos, a long black limousine glided to a silent stop at the manor's entrance. Not a Rolls-Royce, but a sleek corporate Lincoln. The chauffeur opened the door, and Arthur Vance stepped out. He was in his late 50s, a man with a commanding presence. He strode into the lobby, his sharp eyes taking in the disaster in a single sweeping glance. He saw the bewildered guests. He saw my weeping mother. He saw Brian sputtering with rage. And he saw his daughter. Lauren, he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a shard of ice. Can someone please explain to me what in the hell is going on? Lauren ran to him, collapsing into his arms. Daddy, it's a nightmare. Everything's gone. Cameron, he cancelled everything. Brian, seeing a powerful ally, rushed over. Mr. Vance, thank God you're here. This is all my brother's doing. He's deeply unstable, sir, consumed by jealousy. He's done this purely to sabotage my happiness. It's true, Arthur. My father chimed in, desperate to save face. The boy has always been difficult. We are mortified. Arthur Vance listened, his gaze unblinking. He held his daughter, but his eyes were fixed on my family. A fight? He asked softly, looking down at Lauren. What happened last night? Lauren took a shaky breath. It was about money. Brian wanted expensive things. Cameron said he couldn't afford it. He said he'd already spent his savings. And then, his mother. Lauren pointed a trembling finger at Eleanor. She told him that the best gift he could give Brian was to vanish from the family forever. Arthur Vance's expression hardened. He looked at Brian, then at my parents. Then a look of dawning recognition crossed his face. Cameron, he said slowly. Cameron Ellis. I know that name. He turned to my father. Richard, let me ask you something. Do you have any idea who your other son really is? He helps out at the store, my father stammered. Arthur let out a short, sharp bark of a laugh. No. Your son Cameron is the marketing prodigy who nearly landed a major contract with my company years ago. I interviewed him myself. He withdrew at the last minute because of a family emergency. Arthur took a step forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. He came home to save your asses. You had a racehorse in your stable, and you treated him like a plow mule. You were so blinded by the cheap shine of this 1-inch, he gestured dismissively at Brian, that you couldn't see the pure gold standing right next to you. He looked at Brian with chilling finality. Congratulations, son. You got your wish. Your brother has vanished. And in doing so, he has exposed you all for the pathetic, short-sighted fools you truly are. Arthur turned to his daughter. Lauren, give him the ring. Lauren didn't hesitate. She twisted the diamond off her finger and dropped it onto the bare floor. Let's go, Daddy, she whispered. As the Vances walked away, leaving my family in the wreckage of their own making, the silence in the hall was absolute. The fallout from the wedding disaster wasn't just a ripple. It was a tidal wave, and thanks to the internet, I had a front-row seat to the drowning of the Ellis family reputation. I was hundreds of miles away, sitting in another nondescript motel room in North Carolina, when my phone started blowing up again. This time, it wasn't my parents. It was Noah. Dude, his text read, you need to see the Erie Community Forum, right now. Grab popcorn. With a sense of detached curiosity, I opened my laptop and navigated to the local town forum. Usually, this page was reserved for complaints about potholes or missing cats. Tonight, it was a war zone. Brian, in his infinite wisdom and fueled by what I assumed was a lot of whiskey, had decided to control the narrative. He had posted a long, rambling screed titled, The Truth About My Wedding, A Brother's Betrayal. In it, he painted a tragic picture. He described me as a mentally unstable and deeply jealous individual who had suffered a psychotic break. He claimed he had tried to help me for years, that my parents had supported me through my episodes, and that I had repaid their love by maliciously destroying his happiness. He even hinted that I had embezzled the wedding funds for a gambling addiction. It was a masterpiece of fiction, and for the first hour, judging by the timestamps, it seemed to work. There were comments from family friends offering prayers and sympathy. So sorry, Brian. We always knew Cameron was odd. But then the tide turned, and it turned violently. The first crack in the dam came from Chloe, one of Lauren's bridesmaids. She didn't hold back. I was there, she commented. I heard everything. Your mother told him to vanish. She literally said the best gift he could give was to disappear. Cameron paid for everything, and you treated him like garbage. Stop lying. Then, a former employee of Ellis Groceries chimed in. Cameron is the only reason that store is still open. Brian came in once a week to sign checks and flirt with the cashiers. Cameron was there every day, fixing the mess Brian made. Hashtag Team Cameron. Then the floodgates opened. Neighbors, high school classmates, vendors I had worked with. Dozens of people started sharing their own stories of my parents' favoritism and Brian's arrogance. The thread became a public tribunal. I watched in real time as my brother's attempt to destroy my reputation backfired so spectacularly that it vaporized what little social standing my family had left. I wasn't the villain anymore. I was the folk hero who had finally had enough. As I sat there, reading the vindication I had waited 29 years for, my phone rang. It was an unknown number with a Charlotte area code. My heart skipped a beat. I answered, Mr. Ellis? Cameron? The voice was unmistakable. It was calm, authoritative, and commanded respect without raising a decibel. Mr. Vance? I said, sitting up straighter on the lumpy motel mattress. Arthur, I hope you don't mind that I got your number from Noah, he said. I'm calling because I meant what I said in that hallway. I have a position opening up at my headquarters in Charlotte. Senior Director of Strategic Marketing. The salary is double what you were making at your family store, plus a signing bonus that will cover those deposits you lost, and then some. I was speechless. You have an instinct for the heart of a business, Sam, he continued, using the nickname only my friends used. It's a rare gift. I want that gift here. I don't want you to just fix things. I want you to build things. I don't know what to say. I stammered. Say yes, and get down here. We have work to do. Yes, I breathed. Yes, absolutely. Good. See you Monday. I hung up the phone and stared at the wall, tears prickling my eyes. Not tears of sadness, but of relief so profound it felt like gravity had just released its hold on me. As if on cue, my phone rang again. That part of me wanted to ignore it, to block the number and be done with it forever. But another part needed to hear it. I needed to hear the defeat. I answered. Cameron. My father's voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the booming patriarch. It was the thin, raspy voice of a broken old man. Thank God. Where are you? Does it matter? I asked, my voice flat. Listen, son, he began, a pleading tone bleeding into his words. You've made your point. You were angry. We understand. But this has gone too far. The town. People are saying terrible things. You need to come home. We have to do damage control. You can release a statement. Say it was a misunderstanding. We can fix this. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it left me breathless. Even now, standing in the ashes of his own life, his first instinct was to use me to clean up the mess. Fix this. I let out a cold, humorless laugh. There is no this to fix, Dad. There is no we. You made that perfectly clear. Don't be so dramatic, Cameron. This isn't just about us. It's about the family name. The inheritance. He trailed off, realizing how pathetic it sounded. The family name is your problem now, I said, my voice hardening into steel. And the inheritance? The store is bankrupt, Dad. We both know that. Without me, it won't last 6 months. There is no inheritance. Cameron, please. Your mother is sick with worry. Tell Mom I'm doing exactly what she asked, I said. I'm vanishing. Wait, don't you dare hang up on. I pressed the red icon on the screen. Then, with a strange sense of ceremony, I went into my settings. Block caller. Then my mother. Block caller. Then Brian. Block caller. It was a digital massacre, a final cleansing purge. The lines of communication were cut. The severance was complete. 2 days later, I was in Asheville. I chose Asheville because it was close enough to Charlotte for work, but far enough into the mountains to feel like a sanctuary. It was a city alive with a creative, vibrant energy that felt a million miles away from the stagnant, judgmental fishbowl of Erie. The next 2 years were the best of my life. I poured all the energy I had once wasted on my family's drama into my new career. I wasn't Brian's little brother or the fixer anymore. I was Cameron, the guy who turned a failing regional campaign into a national success story. I was respected. I was valued. Arthur became more than a boss. He became a mentor. He taught me the nuances of corporate strategy, but more importantly, he taught me how to value my own contributions. I bought a small house with a wraparound porch overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. I started hiking. I learned to breathe again. And I met Sarah. Sarah owned a local coffee shop where I spent my Sunday mornings. She was sharp, funny, and had a no-nonsense attitude that reminded me of the best parts of myself. We started talking over cappuccinos, then over dinner, then over long drives through the parkway. She knew I had a painful past. I told her the broad strokes, but she never pushed. She just created a safe space for me to be myself. For the first time, I wasn't trying to earn someone's love by being useful. I was just loved for being me. Life was good. It was quiet, steady, and mine. But the past has a way of knocking on the door just when you think you've changed the locks. It arrived in a creamy white envelope, forwarded by Noah with a sticky note that just said, "Sorry, man." She begged me. It was a letter from my mother. My hands trembled as I held it. The handwriting was familiar, elegant, and looped, the same handwriting that had signed my permission slips and my birthday cards, back when those things still happened. Part of me wanted to throw it directly into the trash, unopened. But the ghosts of guilt and obligation are hard to exorcise completely. The fixer in me whispered, "Just check. Just make sure." I slid it open. The letter was a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. It began with a flowery, tear-stained apology for the unfortunate words spoken that night. It glossed over the years of neglect and pivoted quickly to her current state. She wrote that she was terribly ill. A mysterious ailment, she called it, that the doctors couldn't seem to diagnose. She was weak. She was fading. She spent most of her days in bed. My father was lost, struggling to cope with the shame and the bankruptcy of the store, which, true to my prediction, had closed its doors 6 months after I left. Brian was a broken man, consumed by depression after losing his job and his reputation. Then came the hook, her one final wish. "The only thing that could bring me peace in my final days is to see you, my son. To look into your eyes and tell you I love you. Please, Cameron, come home. Fix our shattered family before it's too late." It sent a spear of guilt straight into my heart. What if it was true? What if she was really dying? Could I live with myself if I let her die alone, believing her son hated her? I was so conflicted that I took the letter to Sarah. I needed an outside perspective. She read it silently, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she folded it carefully and handed it back to me. "Cam," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I'm not going to tell you what to do, but as an objective observer, this letter has more red flags than a communist parade." "She says she's dying," I said, rubbing my face. "Mysterious ailment? Fading away? Healthy people don't talk like that," Sarah said. "Desperate manipulators do. She's not asking for forgiveness, Cam. She's issuing a summons. She's losing control, and she's using the ultimate trump card, death, to try and drag you back in." Her words helped to clear some of the emotional fog, but the doubt lingered. Later that day, I was on a video call with Arthur, discussing the quarterly projections. When we finished business, he looked at me closely. "You look distracted, Sam. Everything okay?" I sighed. I told him about the letter. I told him about the guilt. Arthur listened intently, then leaned back in his leather chair. "Let me make a call," he said. "Give me an hour." "A call? To who?" "Just trust me." An hour later, an email arrived in my inbox. It was from Lauren Vance. We had exchanged a few polite messages over the past 2 years. Mostly her checking in to make sure I was okay. But this one was different. "Hi, Sam," she wrote. "My dad told me about the letter. I feel like you deserve to know the truth before you make a decision that could hurt you." Attached to the email were 2 documents. The first was a screenshot from a Facebook group for the Erie Garden Club. It was dated 2 days ago. In the photo, my mother, looking healthy, perhaps a bit thinner but certainly not on her deathbed, was holding a prize for Best Rose Arrangement. The caption read, "Eleanor Ellis, still the queen of the garden. She wasn't dying. She was gardening." The second attachment was a PDF. It was a legal summary from Arthur's lawyers. My father's legal team did a deep dive into Ellis Grocery's finances when we were preparing the prenup and after the wedding fallout. Lauren wrote, "We found this. We didn't send it earlier because we wanted you to move on. But you need to see it now." I opened the PDF. It was a forensic accounting of the store's bank statements dating back 5 years. The numbers jumped out at me. Systematic withdrawals. Checks written to cash. Payments to a shell company I didn't recognize. Total misappropriated funds, $145,000. And the signature on every single withdrawal, Brian Ellis. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was a series of emails attached at the bottom of the file. Emails between Brian and my father. "Dad, I need another $5,000. The car payment is due. I can't, Brian. The accounts are empty. Cameron is starting to ask questions about the margins. Just tell him it's vendor price hikes. He trusts you. He'll fix it. He always fixes it. I stared at the screen, the blood draining from my face. It wasn't just incompetence. It wasn't just laziness. It was felony theft. Brian had been siphoning money from the store for years to fund his lifestyle, to buy his suits and his image. And my parents had known. They had known the whole time. They had covered for him. And when the money ran out, they called me home from Vance Corp, destroying my career, not to save the family legacy, but to unknowingly clean up the evidence of Brian's crimes. I was never the son. I was the cover-up. I was the mule they used to carry the burden of their golden child's sins. The letter in my hand wasn't a plea for love. It was an accessory to a crime. They were broke, desperate, and they needed the fixer back to bail them out one last time. The last remaining thread of attachment I had to them didn't just snap. It disintegrated. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow, but it didn't knock me down. Instead, it straightened my spine. For years, I had carried a heavy backpack of what-ifs. What if I hadn't been good enough? What if I had tried harder? What if I was wrong to leave? Now, looking at the black and white proof of their betrayal on my computer screen, I realized that backpack was empty. There was nothing in it but lies. I wasn't the ungrateful son. I was the victim of a long con. A con played by the people who were supposed to protect me. I stood up and walked over to the shredder in the corner of my home office. I picked up the letter from my mother. The tear-stained stationery, the elegant handwriting, the lies about dying, the manipulative plea for peace. I didn't hesitate. I didn't feel a pang of sadness. I felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a judge delivering a verdict. I fed the letter into the slot. The machine roared to life, a mechanical gnashing of teeth. I watched as the paper was pulled down, sliced into 1,000 meaningless confetti strips. Whir. Crunch. Goodbye, Eleanor, I whispered. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was clean. It was the silence of a room that had finally been aired out after years of rot. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. The sky was a deep, bruising purple, slowly lightening to a pale gray. I put on my hiking boots, grabbed my gear, and drove to the trailhead of Mount Mitchell. I needed to climb. I needed to feel the burn in my legs and the air in my lungs. The hike was grueling. The trail was steep and rocky, winding through dense forests of fir and spruce. I pushed myself harder than usual, letting the physical exertion burn off the residual anger. With every step, I visualized leaving something behind on the trail. Step. Leaving behind the bike with the flat tire. Step. Leaving behind the frozen grocery store in the blizzard. Step. Leaving behind the dinner table and the empty wedding hall. Step. Leaving behind the guilt. By the time I reached the summit, my legs were shaking, and my shirt was soaked with sweat. But as I broke through the tree line and stepped onto the observation deck, the sun crested the horizon. It was magnificent. The world fell away beneath me in layers of blue and gold. The clouds were a carpet of white below my feet. I was standing on top of the world. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the thin, cold air. Tasted like freedom. I pulled out my phone to capture the moment. The signal bar flickered to life, and a notification popped up on the screen. Facebook friend request, Eleanor Ellis. I stared at it. 2 years ago, that notification would have sent me into a spiral. It would have opened the floodgates of turmoil. But this morning, standing on the summit, I just looked at it. I saw the profile picture. A photo of her and Brian from years ago, looking happy and smug. I saw it for what it was. A ghost knocking on a door that was no longer there. A final, desperate attempt to pull me back into a story that had already ended. She wasn't looking for her son. She was looking for a resource. And that resource was permanently out of stock. With a calm, steady finger, I didn't just ignore it. I pressed decline. Then, I navigated to the profile settings and hit block. I put the phone back in my pocket, took one last look at the sunrise, and turned around to head back down the mountain. My life was waiting for me. Sarah was waiting. Arthur was waiting. Career I loved was waiting. The Ellis family was a tragedy, yes. But it wasn't my tragedy anymore. I had rewritten the ending. I drove home with the windows down, the radio playing loud. I stopped at the grocery store, a Vance Corporation store, naturally, and bought ingredients for dinner. Tonight I was cooking for Sarah. We were going to drink wine, laugh, and plan our next trip. I was happy. It was a quiet, steady kind of happiness. Not the frantic, fleeting joy I used to chase by pleasing others. It was the peace that comes from building a life on a foundation of self-respect instead of the quicksand of others' approval. They told me to vanish. And in the end, it was the best advice they ever gave me. Because by vanishing from their lives, I finally became visible to myself. So that's my story. It's a heavy one, I know. But if there's one thing I want you to take away from this, it's a lesson that took me nearly 30 years to learn. You cannot set yourself on fire to keep others warm. Family is important, yes, but shared DNA is not a license for abuse. We are often taught that we have to forgive family no matter what, that we have to be the bigger person, the fixer, or the peacemaker. But sometimes, being the bigger person means being big enough to protect your own peace. I learned that your worth is not defined by how useful you are to people. It's not defined by how much money you can give them, how many problems you can solve for them, or how much abuse you can tolerate in silence. Your worth is inherent. And if the people around you, even your own parents, can't see that, it is not your job to force them to open their eyes. It is your job to walk away and find the people who do see you. Leaving is hard. The guilt is real. But the freedom on the other side, it is worth every single step. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to make a tough choice to cut toxic people out of your life? Or maybe you've been the fixer in your family. Drop a comment below with your perspective. Or, if this story resonated with you and you agree that self-respect has to come first, just comment the word good. It lets me know that we're on this journey of self-worth together. Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose themselves. Thanks for listening, guys. You're the best. Stay strong.